Hello and welcome. I'm Sumita Kareer and you're watching Rush Hour, where we bring you the day's top highlights condensed into a half-an-hour show. So stay with us for the next 30 minutes as we get you the day's top highlights. And of course, the day's top story remains Prime Minister Modi's 3-day Australia tour. In fact, a street in Australia has been renamed as Little India. The Prime Minister stole the show in Sydney, with the Indian diaspora giving him a standing ovation. Prime Minister Modi said the strongest and biggest foundations of the India-Australia relations are mutual trust and mutual respect. And the real reason behind this is the Indian diaspora. Albanese and Modi also announced the inaugural advisory board for the Centre for Australia-India Relations, while India will also open a consulate in Brisbane. So that's the big visit by Prime Minister Modi. He's on a 3-nation tour, and of course, to discuss India-Australia relations and what do we expect out of this visit, we are now joined by Anil Trigunayat, who's a former ambassador. Sir, thanks very much for joining us here on ET Now. So we saw during the day visuals of Indian expats in fact gathering to welcome Prime Minister Modi, in fact meeting the leader. There were chants of Modi, Modi that reverberated the space, the event hall, them saying that we are very proud of you, you're a great leader of the world. Great visuals, great pictures. In fact, even Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also called him the boss. So all of these great optics, but what does this visit really achieve both for India and Australia? And secondly, I want to ask you, what really explains Australia's sudden newfound love for India, and does it have a China connection?
Well, as you know, that relationships are not built in a day. We have had a very difficult relationship with Australia in the 90s and the early 2000s. And it was only Prime Minister Modi when he went there in 2014. And thereafter, Australians, being, of course, due to the regional geopolitics, they also started looking at India with a much greater interest. You might remember that at one time in 1990s, when we had our nuclear tests, Australia was one of the first countries to have placed sanctions. But today, we have come a very long way. And I would give a lot of credit to Prime Minister Modi for his personal charm that he does, and the way he has been accepted everywhere, not only by the diaspora, but the communities. As you know, President Biden himself said that I would like to take your autograph. Or for that matter, when we saw the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister paying him a very different kind of a regard, which is very unusual, but that is very clear in terms of our cultural traits. And similarly, when Prime Minister Albanese, he called him as the boss, that is something. And we have seen the same kind of thing happening in the United States when President Trump was there and he went around in front of the Indian community. So the Indian community connect is extremely important. At the same time, in many places I have seen that people say, I wish we had a leader like Prime Minister Modi. So his personal charm, Indian growth story, and India's developmental story, and India's role in the world, and the principled stance that India takes has brought us to this point. Now, Australia obviously has challenges in its neighborhood with China, like we have, and therefore there is a commensurate kind of a platform on which we can work together and synergize.
I'll come on that point. I'll come to that point.
So, in this particular...
I'll come to that point, sir, but we'll have to cut across to Prime Minister Modi's bite, and let's hear what he had to say earlier in the day.
2014 में आया था तो आपसे एक वादा किया था। वादा ये था कि आपको फिर भारत के किसी प्रधानमंत्री का 28 साल तक इंतजार नहीं करना पड़ेगा। तो लीजिए, यहां सिडनी में इस ऐना में मैं फिर हाजिर हूं। आज दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी और सबसे युवा टैलेंट फैक्ट्री जिस देश में है वो है सही जवाब दे रहे हैं आप, वो है इंडिया।
Well, their Prime Minister Modi calling India the world's talent factory. And of course, sir, coming back to you, like you rightly said, the India-Australia relationship isn't built in a day. It goes a long way back. In fact, cemented by Mr. Modi, and rightly so in this very visit, as we can see, rousing scenes, people really, really ecstatic on the Prime Minister's visit. But coming back to your point about Australia's sudden love for India, and does it really have a China connection? Could you bring in the China angle here?
Well, I think that one of the most important things for any country in its foreign policy is its own national interest. And India is the growing market. And as Prime Minister Modi says, the talent factory, and then Australia is a very excellent educational hub. And a large number of Indian students are going there. They have actually facilitated the arrival of the Indian talent and their absorption in the society, their assimilation in the society, which is extremely good for both countries to do that. And Australia is eyeing India as a very big market for their own products. And as you know, that we have signed this comprehensive economic cooperation agreement last year, which became operationalized and which is going to further increase our trade from roughly $25 billion to somewhere around $100 billion. That's what we are targeting in the defense sector, in the strategic domain, in the Quad collaboration, in the vaccines, and several other areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing. So we are all finding these areas in which we can work together apart from the normal trade and investments. But the China connection, as you mentioned, is very much there. The reason being that for Australia, which has the closest partnerships, especially Mr. Albanese's party earlier or his predecessors were rather close. And that was one of the reasons that Australia was keeping a bit of a distance from other countries in the regions, not to send bad signals. But then they realized that what was happening to them, their economy, if the Chinese were not happy, they were trying to squeeze that. So naturally, they were looking for alternative markets, and there is no other better market than India other than this. So China, plus one, when anybody looks at this, is India, one of the countries that comes to everybody's mind. And the big size of India today is the most populous nation in the world also. At the same time, the overall geopolitics is also changed because of the United States and good close relations with India, similarly with Australia and Japan. I think that the reason in the Indian Indo-Pacific is also motivating this partnership a little more, apart from its bilateral content.
Right, sir. And, like you rightly mentioned, everybody is interested in the West interest is also peaking in India due to rapid economic growth. And I think Biden also, the way, he sort of put out his gesture towards Mr. Modi was also recognized by all over the world, in fact, by Indians all across the world. In fact, the West's interest in India and global interest in India is due to a rapid economic growth, population growth, and also how, India really responded to the challenges that were presented to it by COVID, even when there is news about the slowdown. But, everybody's seeing India as the bright spot, that everybody is looking at. Now, really talking about CEPA, very, very briefly, since we're running out of time, how is India going to benefit from the CEPA agreement that India has been working on with Australia? We already have an FTA going on with Australia.
Us 95% of the access of our products on duty-free basis or on the preferential basis. So obviously there will be a great opportunity. Likewise, trade is never a one-way street. So Australians are looking at the Indian market as well. You mentioned about the pandemic and other areas. I think that India set an example for the world. When we talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, India actually tries to show it by action, like the vaccine diplomacy, the provision of medicines to the world that India provided everywhere is something that the world looks up to India. And then whether International Solar Alliance, CDRI, India's stance on the climate change, and the voice of Global South. So today, India is in a very different league altogether. India's voice is heard, and the opinion matters. And that's what precisely I say today, India indeed matters. And that's why all these countries are wooing us much more than they would have otherwise thought of.
Absolutely, sir. Rightly said, as India being called as the bright spot in a global economy. But, sir, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to cut the conversation short here and end the story here because we have a whole host of other stories lined up throughout the show. So now...